Let's jump in. A large university was hosting an orientation for incoming students, new incoming students at their university. See, and talking is hard too. So, as the school year the week before the school year was starting, the final event of the week was a reception with the president, some of the administration and their staff, and their spouses. They were all out on the front lawn, just kind of mingling around, and an older lady began talking with one of the incoming students. And she asked him, this older woman asked this student, "How do you like things so far?" And he said, "Well, I love the school, but there's one thing I think that needs to change." And she asked, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, the president. I mean, let's face it, he's just an old guy. He's an OG. He's an old fuddy-duddy. He's a real stick in the mud, and they ought to put him out to pasture and, bring in somebody new with fresh ideas and just get this school turned around. Get rid of that old guy." The woman gasped, and she said, "Young man, do you know who I am?" He said, "No," and she said, "Well, as you figured, I'm the president's wife." So the student said, "Well, do you know who I am?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Good," and ran off. I love that story. It goes to show you that identity is everything. Identity is everything. In the world we live, man, identity reveals who we are, reveals our character. Identity even reveals where we're going in life. I'm a father, so, I have that responsibility of taking care of children. I'm a husband, so I have a responsibility to take care of my wife. I'm a preacher, so I have a responsibility to take care of the church. And so identity reveals who we are. And as we examine Jesus' life, including the things that he said, the things that he did, it becomes very apparent that Jesus is the King of Kings, as we sang about, and the Lord of Lords. This is who Jesus is. Now, we all agree to that, but I'm going to maybe make us take a step back and question this a little bit. Who is Jesus? Last week, we wrapped up kind of the first half of our summer series called Summer in the Sun, and we talked about how Jesus is our friend. We took different little aspects. How is Jesus our friend in our lives, right? Over the course of this second half of the series, Summer in the Sun, we're going to look at how Jesus is Lord of all. And so we're going to look at different aspects of that statement, how Jesus is Lord of all. Now, we're going to be in the New Testament book of Luke. As usual, if you want to turn there in your Bibles, we're going to be in Luke chapter 9. If you want to follow along and need help finding it, it's pretty easy in the New Testament. It's the third book in Matthew, Mark, and then Luke. The verses will also be on the screen, so if you didn't bring your Bibles, you don't have to feel guilty. All right? Well, let's jump in. Luke chapter 9, verses 18 and 19. While Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" Now, this is an important question. All right, so what are the crowds saying about my identity? Who am I? And so they answered, "Well, John the Baptist. John the Baptist had died, and maybe they thought Jesus had come back to life. Others are saying you're Elijah, that great Old Testament prophet who did some really cool things, or still others that one of the ancient prophets has come back, maybe Daniel or Ezekiel or somebody like that." So they're listing all these names, and I think these are some pretty good answers, as these are some of the things that the people were saying about Jesus. And maybe, just maybe, the disciples are trying to compliment Jesus in a kind way. They're comparing him to some really great people, important people in the history of Israel. I found a survey from just a few years ago. 52% of American adults, over half of American adults, believe that Jesus was just a great teacher and nothing more. What do we say? I mean, really, again, I want us to really analyze this. When it comes to Jesus, here's the deal. We've got a huge decision to make. This is huge. Who is he? What is Jesus' identity? Because if Jesus was just a great teacher who captivated the crowds with some great lessons and maybe fooled them with some of his miracles, then what are we doing here? Like, why go to church? Why read the Bible? Why try to be a good person if that's all Jesus was? Now, C.S. Lewis, some of you know this quote. He said, "Let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He's not left that open to us." He says, "We are faced then with a frightening alternative. This man that we are talking about, Jesus, either was and is just what he said, or else a lunatic or something worse." He closes it out by saying, "I have to accept the view that he was and is God." With Jesus, it's all or nothing. We can't just say he's a great teacher and move on with our lives. If we believe that, then we've got to believe everything else. Either he is who he says he is, or he's crazy. So verse 20, "But you, who do you say I am?" Now Peter, he speaks right up. He says, "Well, you're God's Messiah. You're the Christ. You are the anointed one that Israel's been waiting for all these years to lead us into a new era of religion," right? Now Peter, he's not the only one to conclude who Jesus is, right? So the angels, when Jesus was born, they declared it to some shepherds out in the fields, didn't they? John the Baptist announced it as he saw Jesus coming. As Jesus was beginning his ministry, John announced it. Even the demons shouted it. Judas admitted it to the religious leaders after he betrayed Jesus that night. The Apostle Paul wrote about it. Pilate even tried to persuade the crowd by saying who Jesus was, and they wouldn't buy it. The centurion at the foot of the cross declared it. Surely this man is the Son of God. Thomas confessed it. And Peter, on the day of Pentecost, preached it. Jesus is the Christ. He is the Son of the living God. So there's a lot going on where we can read the scriptures and go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now, there is so much more evidence to reinforce who Jesus is, to reinforce our faith in Jesus. We have the eyewitness accounts, we have the fulfilled prophecies, we have historical and archaeological records that keep digging things up, proving who Jesus is. We have the perfect written record in the Bible. And we have millions of lives that have been transformed by the good news of Jesus Christ. Who do you say Jesus is? Is he real or is he a fraud? Some of you might remember this on April 21st, 1980. Rosie Ruiz competed in the Boston Marathon, and she was the first woman to cross the finish line that day in record time, in almost record time that day. So she competed, but I got to tell you this, she also cheated. As she crossed the finish line, everyone cheered, this is amazing, but something didn't seem right. And it took 8 days to investigate what actually happened. Well, they found out no one had seen her in the first 25 miles of the race. When she crossed the finish line, her face wasn't flushed. She wasn't out of breath and as sweaty as you might think an athlete would be after having run, 26.2 miles. And as they continued to investigate, they actually found out that she had skipped the first 25 miles of the race. She actually jumped in the last mile and ran the last mile to finish the line. Here's what I found interesting. When she crossed the finish line, a perceptive reporter came up to her and said this, "You're either the fastest woman on the face of the earth or you're a fraud." What do you say about Jesus? Either Jesus is the Christ, God's living Son, who conquered the grave, or he's a fraud and pulled off the biggest hoax in all of history. Because you think about what he did in life. Somehow he fooled everybody when he fed the multitudes and performed all these miracles and raised people from the dead. Somehow he allowed the soldiers to kill him, and he survived that. He recovered from that beating that more than half the people didn't survive. After being crucified, he was placed in an airtight tomb for 2 days without food and water. And yet he was able to, on his own, push away the stone and take on an entire battalion of soldiers and somehow get them to lie about what actually happened. And then he convinced a bunch of his disciples, his buddies, into being tormented and imprisoned and murdered for what they knew to be a lie. Was this really a fraud? And don't forget that throughout his 3-year ministry, every time he talked about dying, in the same breath he talked about rising from the dead. And not to mention the other 300 prophecies he fulfilled. Was it really a hoax? What do you say? Is Jesus the King of Kings? Or is he just someone who fooled and faked his way into the historical records? Now, here's where we got to figure this out. If you really believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, that's his identity. If you really believe that, then it should revolutionize your life.